Put ragged clothes upon your back and sleep upon the ground, and tell police about your rights as they drag you down, and ask them as they lead you to some deserted door. Yes, I know you're set for fighting, but what are you fighting for?
I beg to move that the committees consider the draft electoral registration data schemes order 2011 and the draft representation of the people electoral registration data schemes regulations 2011. Now, I think both sides of the House think that we need to improve our electoral registration system. We need to both make it more accurate and more complete than it is at the moment, but also making sure that people find it as easy as possible to register. And we also said that there are potentially some tools that we could use that might tackle under-registration and make sure that people have every opportunity to register. And data matching is one of them. It involves comparing the electoral register against other public databases in order to identify people who are currently missing from the register, which will then give the electoral registration officer the chance to contact them and see whether they wish to be added to the electoral register. We also think that using data matching will be able to identify people who are on the register but who aren't entitled to be, and the electoral register will be therefore able to remove them. So we think that data matching can potentially help with making the register more accurate but also more complete. We don't know how effective data matching is going to be, hence the pilots that we're proposing to carry out. So we want to trial data matching over the next few months in a range of areas in England, Wales and Scotland. The results of the trial will be evaluated with the assistance of the Electoral Commission, and the results of the trials will then enable us to determine whether we want to extend data matching and give those powers to electoral registration officers permanently. Now, the order will enable some specified data holding public authorities, including the Department for Work and Pensions, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs and the Department for Education, to provide electoral registration officers with the data necessary for their data matching schemes. It also sets the 1st of March 2012 as the date by which each of the schemes must have been evaluated. And for the information of the committee, the 1st of March 2012 and not the end of December 2011, the data matching will take place. The electoral registration officer will then have a matching report passed back to them. If it's in the completeness case, where they've then identified some people who appear to exist but they don't have on the register, they will then approach them. They'll explain where they've got the information from, what it is they're doing, why they're approaching them, and give them the option to be registered to vote. If they don't want to, that's fine, but they'll give them the option. And this exercise is to try and get the database to be more accurate. And that doesn't include, obviously, excluding people who are entitled to vote. The two aspects of this, and I think I've emphasised whenever I've spoken about it, are equally important. So accuracy, which is there's nobody on the electoral register who isn't entitled to be, but also completeness, which is everyone entitled to vote is on the register, and both parts of that are equally important and will be for the way we conduct the pilot.
I'm grateful to the Minister for his lucid explanation of why we're here, though I think there's just one other element to why these regulations are being brought forward, which is, of course, that the government wants to move forward as fast as possible towards individual registration, and indeed before the next general election. The agreement that there was between all political parties when the legislation was brought forward in the last Parliament, namely that there should be a voluntary basis move towards individual registration up until the next general election, and then after the next general election that there should be mandatory change, would be the appropriate speed, and I think that that's where we should be going. But I note that the government, for whatever partisan reasons of its own, has decided to move rather faster, and I think that that's a shame. The idea of data sharing is a good idea. It's something that when we were in government, we tried to progress. If anything, I think we were probably accused at the time when we were wanting to data share, in particular by some Conservative backbenchers, of wanting a data state, and that it was inappropriate to be sharing data in this way. But I would just point out that the data that's actually going to be shared is very limited. Its name, in the vast majority of cases, its name, address and date of birth. I do have a few questions for the Minister, though. First of all, in his different schemes, I understand why he wants to have, because these are pilots, he wants to have each of them to be slightly different. But it seems to be a little odd that in England, for instance, the Royal Mail is one of those bodies in relation to Southwark, but not in relation to Stratford-upon-Avon. And I don't understand why that would be the case. I would have thought that whilst there is probably a more mobile population in Southwark than in Stratford-upon-Avon, nonetheless you would want to be able to compare whether that is valuable in both those different kinds of areas. In Scotland, I noticed that for Edinburgh, it's just the Department for Work and Pension, the Department for Social Development and the HMRC, and not the Department for Transport or the Student Loans Company that's included, which is the case in relation to Glasgow. And I just wonder why there will be that discrepancy between those two local authorities. And for that matter, I can't see a Scottish local authority that has the MOD as a relevant body that's providing material. And certainly in relation to Wales, for instance, since it produces a larger number of members of the armed forces than its proportion of the population, it would seem to me that that would be a valuable thing to be introducing in each and every case, not least because so many armed forces personnel and veterans fail to end up on the electoral register and are effectively disenfranchised when it comes to elections. He might perhaps just explain to us why the Renfrewshire Improvement Service Company is included as a body, especially since it's a private organisation, perhaps he'd like to explain to us exactly what the situation is there, and why the Home Office or the Ministry of Justice aren't included at all, because I would have thought that, for instance, in relation to people who have recently come out of prison.
Originally, we were thinking about there being some exchange of data, including nationality data, and I decided that the level of benefit we get from that would be disproportionate. So the only information that we're proposing to share are now names and addresses.
But the hardest thing I'll ask you, if you will only try, is take your children by their hands and look into their eyes. And there you'll see the answer you should have seen before. If you'll win the wars at home, there'll be no fighting anymore.